Hello, Laverne here, and thank you for joining me. In this video, I'm going to be talking once again on the Didache, also known as the writing of the 12 Apostles. Now, this is the third video on the subject. In the first two, I talked about why it is that the Didache was denied canonization, why it did not make it through the canon process. I explained that it was in large part due to the fact that pagans at the time who had become Christians, were new Christians, would not have accepted the teachings in the Didache because it went against their culture. Things such as abortion, infanticide, eating food sacrificed to idols. These are the kinds of things talked about in the Didache and condemned. Sodomy is another example. Having sex with children, molesting children. These are things talked about in the Didache, but things that were accepted and were the norm in the pagan lifestyle. Now, I'd like to stress the two paths that are talked about in the Didache, for it tells us there are two paths. One leads to life and the other leads to death. And it explains the path that leads to life, the way that we are supposed to live if we want to find ourselves on that path which leads to the kingdom of God. The second path, which leads to destruction, is the wide path that Jesus talked about. So in essence, what the Didache is an expansion on, or I shouldn't even say an expansion, it is giving us the full account of Christ's teaching on the two paths. For in the Gospels, what we have is a Reader's Digest version of the two paths that Jesus taught. We simply know that Jesus told us there are two paths. One is the narrow path. It is difficult, and few will find it, and this is the path that leads to life. It leads to the kingdom of God. The second path is a wide path. Many will walk this path, and it is the path that leads to destruction, to the gates of hell. Now, in these passages that we see in the New Testament, it doesn't explain everything about these two paths. We are simply told that they exist. But in the Didache, we have the full version of it. We have, through the 12 apostles, who got it directly from Christ, what these two paths are. And the narrow path is described, how we must live if we're going to be walking the narrow path. And then it also describes the wide path, the kinds of things that if we live a particular way will take us down that wide path to destruction. And they are the things that we must avoid. So this is what the Didache teaches us. Now, one of the things found in it, the path that leads to destruction, it talks about eating food sacrificed to idols. And I believe this is very significant, because we see in Acts that the 12 apostles write a letter to the church of Antioch. It's given to Paul and Barnabas, and in it they give a short list of things that the new Christians, the pagans who have, and Gentiles who have recently turned to Christianity, the things that they must adhere to. And one of the things is that they must not eat food sacrificed to idols. Jesus confirms this in the book of Revelation, in the letters to the 7 churches. In the one letter, he talks about those who are doing this evil of eating food sacrificed to idols. And we see it in the Didache explained that it is one of the things that will lead us to destruction. But Paul, he contradicts this teaching by saying that it's all right to eat food sacrificed to idols, that it really means nothing. So Paul's teaching contradicts. We see in 3 places, Revelation from Jesus, in the book of Acts, and in the Didache, we see that Paul's teaching contradicts this. And this is important to understand. Now, I'm not saying Paul is a false prophet, but I am saying that some of his teachings contradicted both Christ and the apostles. Now, regarding this moral law that is talked about in the Didache. Now, it doesn't call it the moral law, but I have made a video recently where I talk about the two laws. We have the law of Moses and we have the moral law of God. Now, we are no longer bound by the law of Moses and the 613 ordinances found in it. However, we are still bound by God's moral law. And we see this in the teaching of the Didache and the two paths, one that leads to life and the other leads to death. In essence, what it is doing is explaining God's moral law and those things that we must adhere to. Now, something else I'd like to talk about in this video has to do with the prosperity message that is out there. For this is a false teaching, and this is talked about in the Didache. For it talks about how prophets are supposed to be treated, both prophets who are living in a particular area and they have a church, and also those who are simply coming through the town or the city. They are traveling prophets, and it gives very strict instructions as to how we are to treat them. And in one rendering, one translation of the Didache, I found, and I like this, the way it was worded. It said of people who ask for money for themselves, that they are making a trade of Christ. And that's what we see happening in the church today, in the apostate church. Through the prosperity message, people, false pastors, preachers, and false prophets have made a trade of Christ. They've turned Christianity into a trade. And this is warned about in the Didache. And there are strict instructions as to who we're supposed to call these prophets out, that they are false prophets. It tells us that they are to work and earn a living. Now, if they are unable, if they do not know a trade and are not able to earn a living, then they are to be helped at the discretion of the congregation. But the Didache explains that all Christians are supposed to work. There's supposed to be no lazy Christians. If you are able to work, you're supposed to work. And this goes for prophets and pastors and preachers. They are supposed to work for a living. They aren't supposed to become rich through the trade of Christ. But that is not adhered to today. Today, in the apostate church, the prosperity message and the prosperity pimps have contradicted the teaching of the 12 apostles. All right, that's about it for this video. As always, I look forward to comments and messages. Until next time, peace and blessings.